welcome. My name is Cabrero. I'm the president of Casa de las Américas, the oldest active Cuban organization in the United States. Our organization supports the normalization of relations between the United States and the Republic of Cuba. We believe in peace, in the confraternity between all people of the world. We are here today to denounce an injustice. We exhort our President Barack Obama to order Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to comply with the mandate of Amnesty International and the United Nations to grant humanitarian visas to Adriana Perez and Olga Salanueva to visit their husbands Gerardo Hernandez and René González, incarcerated in U.S. prisons. Gerardo Hernandez and René González are two of the Cuban Five arrested in 1998 for infiltrating anti-Cuban organizations in Miami, Florida. When they submit to the FBI evidence of acts of terrorism and sabotage against their country, ironically, the FBI arrests them. They were tried in a hostile environment of anti-Cuban sentiment in Miami. They didn't work at the White House or the Pentagon or the State Department. They never had or sought access to any secret information that would jeopardize the security of our nation. However, they did something unforgivable. They fought anti-Cuban terrorism, and they did it in Miami. The State Department has told them not to bother requesting the visas to see their husbands anymore. They claim that Olga and Adriana pose a threat to the national security of our country. Really? In contrast, within a span of 10 months, Iran, the country that, according to the U.S., is in alignment with the devil, has granted humanitarian visas for the second time to 3 American mothers to see their children. In contradiction, the U.S., which is supposedly the greatest defender of human rights, has bravely fallen short on the case of the wives without rights and the case of the Cuban Five.
Meléndez, coordinator of Wives Without Rights campaign and a member of Casa de las Américas. Our campaign is centered on the denial of visas for Olga Salanueva and Adriana Perez. They are Cuban women who have not seen their husbands in over 11 years. Their husbands are anti-terrorist Cubans incarcerated in federal prisons. These 2 women have been denied visas to visit their husbands in the United States. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, part of the Human Rights Commission, declared on May 27, 2005, 5 years ago today, that the deprivation of liberty of the Cuban Five is arbitrary and requested the government of the United States to adopt the necessary steps to remedy the situation. 5 years later, there has been no response from the United States. Amnesty International has repeatedly raised the issue with the United States authorities since 2002 because it believes that denying the men visits from their wives is unnecessarily punitive and contrary to the standards for humane treatment of prisoners and states' obligations to protect family life. The organization has said that it believes that this deprivation is particularly harsh given the length of the men's sentences. René González has been sentenced to 15 years imprisonment and Gerardo Hernandez to life imprisonment, and questions that have been raised about the fairness of the men's conviction. Mr. President, this situation is somewhat baffling to us. As you know from your campaign field operations, Cuban Americans that voted for you were under 40 years old and believed in your promise to normalize relations between the United States and Cuba. Mr. President, you have in a prominent site on your mantle a Nobel Peace Prize. 10 Nobel Prize winners have asked you to consider this case, 4 of them Nobel Peace Prize winners. You can demonstrate your humanity before the world and live up to the vision and mission of the Nobel Peace Prize by granting Olga Salanueva and Adriana Perez visas on humanitarian considerations.
And I am the pastor of La Resurrección United Methodist Church, located in Elton Avenue in the South Bronx. Ours is a church very committed to issues of social justice, and we believe that mistreatment and disrespect to any human being, it is a challenge to our faith as a community, and it's a challenge also to our Christian witness. Tenets of the Christian faith in the more than 11 years refusal to allow Adriana Perez and Olga Salanueva to visit their husbands in a U.S. prison? What about respect among nations and a willingness to hear the cry of those in need? What about the gospel teaching that Jesus is very present with those who are in prison, and our failure to visit those in jail is a failure to follow Christ and see Christ in the face of those who are most vulnerable?
My name is Ron Kuby. I'm a New York City-based civil rights and criminal defense lawyer, and I have no organizational affiliation outside of general irritant to the government, something I learned from my late mentor, William M. Kunstler, who was one of the founders of the Center for Constitutional Rights, something I've been hoping, tradition I've been trying to keep on. The denial of visas to the spouses of Gerardo Hernandez and Rene Gonzalez is more than a humanitarian disgrace. It's also a legal disgrace. The Supreme Court of the United States has repeatedly held that prisoners have a constitutional right to visits from their spouses. Under the 8th Amendment to the Constitution that prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, the incarcerated have a right to maintain crucial family relationships with visits from those closest to them. This is a right that well predates the Constitution. It comes to us from antiquity, and we're a society that claims to value the sanctity of marriage. And the right to a spousal visit while incarcerated is a right that obviously trumps or survives past incarceration itself. 2 generations ago, if you were serving a life term of imprisonment in the United States of America, you were considered to be civilly dead. You lost your rights to see your children. Your marriage was dissolved automatically. You were civilly dead. Well, a more enlightened Supreme Court, thanks to the struggle of many, many prisoners' families, overturned those rulings.
My name is Vicente, Alba, Panama. I am here as a spokesperson for the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights New York City chapter, and I am here to join our voices as a community, as a people, to the voices demanding justice in this case. The President of the United States, the American government, cannot preach human rights while it violates people's human rights. You cannot denounce Cuba for alleged human rights violations while your conduct is that of the violation of human rights of the Cuban people, both in Cuba and here within the prison system of the United States. So we are here to join in the voices as people who fight for civil rights, for human rights, to demand that the visas be granted to the wives and the families of these men.
Well, it's a fascinating question, because while prisoners unequivocally have a constitutional right to spousal visits, prisoners, or indeed citizens as a whole, don't have any constitutional right to compel the State Department to issue a visa. So if the wives were here on U.S. soil, they could come in to see their husbands. And if the Federal Bureau of Prisons denied them that right, we would go to court and vindicate that right, and they would have their visits under proper conditions. But through the expedient of manipulating the visa process, which is almost exclusively in the hands of the executive branch of government, you effectively preclude the exercise of this most fundamental right. So in a very real sense, you have a situation where you have a right, but no actual remedy to vindicate it. And I know that the legal team that's headed by Lenny Weinglass is considering and discussing this and trying to figure out what path is open beyond that of simply political pressure. Because while you can have principled discussions as to what should happen to political prisoners, you can have principled discussions about the Cuban Five, and reasonable people can disagree in some areas. Reasonable people cannot, or at least have not tried, to disagree about the right of wives to visit their husbands in prison. There is no argument on the other side. There's just the exercise of raw power, and raw power saying there's nothing you can do about it. And we're here to try to prove that wrong.